who better to speak to this evening than Mark Harper, the Transport Secretary? Many strikes, of course, that you've been grappling with your whole time as Transport Secretary. But just before we get to that,
sure.
Can I just get your reaction to a story that's broken this afternoon? Tobias Ellwood resigning as chair of the Defence Select Committee. This is after he released a video effectively praising the Taliban. Was that the right decision by him?
What, releasing the video or the resigning? Well, look, it's not for a member of the government to comment on a chairman of a parliamentary select committee. I mean, look, he clearly has concluded that what he said and the video that he released was unwise. But, you know, who the chairman of the select committee is not a matter for the government. It's a matter for the House of Commons. Well, I saw the video and I don't think it reflected what I know about Afghanistan and the way women are treated in that country. So I don't think it was a representation of what's going on, and that's obviously what Tobias has concluded. But it'll be for the House of Commons to make a decision about who the new chairman should be, and that's a matter for members of Parliament. OK. GDP fell more than expected in July. It's not a great look from a PM who said he'd sort out the economy, is it? Well, I think you also have to look at the revisions that the ONS made to the statistics recently to show over a 3-month period the economy grew. And also, you know, the narrative we've been having from the Labour Party is that the economy hadn't grown post-pandemic. And we now know that Britain was the fastest growing G7 country other than the United States post-pandemic.
It's an important point you
which is important because Rishi Sunak
important.
Was the Chancellor during the pandemic who made some really big calls on the economy, which not everyone agreed with, which we now know meant that we were the fastest growing G7 economy recovering from the pandemic, which is a really big deal.
Accept that. What I have to go on now is the figures we have, right, from the ONS, and they are saying that growth is anaemic and that it fell in July.
Well, I listened to the interview that the independent head of the ONS gave, and he made it clear that, yes, there were 1-month figures, but he also said over a 3-month period, the figures were actually quite positive with growth in a number of sectors of the economy. So, look...
So we should be relaxed. We should be happy then with the growth
No,
levels.
the government's not relaxed. The government's focused, as we know from the government's top priority, on halving inflation, and also the other 5 priorities, 3 of them are economic, about growing the economy and about making sure we reduce debt. And the government's focused on those. It's not relaxed at all. That's the top priority for the government. And my department, Transport, is about investing in transport provision to enable the economy to grow. It's an economic driver.
Are you also focused on stopping the strike action that the ONS was pretty clear was a big driver of some of the growth damage we've seen? How damaging has it been to the economy?
Well, look, I am, and you know when I was interviewed by you before, when I first became Transport Secretary, I met all the union leaders. We changed the tone of the debate and we made some progress. As you remember, we had an offer on the table to all of the RMT members that work for Network Rail. That was put to the members, the union members, overwhelmingly accepted, 90% turnout, 76% in favour. Now, for reasons that I genuinely don't understand, there's a similar offer, similar value, very reasonable offer in line with what people across the economy have been paid, with some reform that the unions have on the table. It's been made to them by the train operating companies, and for reasons best known to themselves, they won't put it to their members, to let their members decide. That's what should happen next. Let their members decide whether they want to do the deal.
When was the last time you met union leaders?
I haven't met them for some time because...
How long is some time?
Well, I haven't met them...
days, weeks?
No. I haven't met them. I'm not doing the negotiations. The negotiations are between the trade union...
It's a really simple question.
Well...
When did you last meet them?
No, I haven't met them for some time because...
But how long is some time?
Well, no, I met Mick Lynch and Mick Whelan earlier this year. And since I met them, I can't remember the exact date, but I'm not pretending it was recently because the negotiations have been undertaking between the train operating companies, and there's a deal on the table waiting to be put to the members.
Last 6 months?
No, it was the earlier part of the year. We changed the tone of the debate. We resolved the dispute with Network Rail, which is tens of thousands of employees working for the rail network. That deal's done, which means that on strike days, there's less disruption. Freight's not disrupted, for example. And there's an offer on the table. That offer's a good one. It's fair and reasonable. And I don't understand why the unions won't put it to their members and let their members decide.
Do you take some responsibility for this? Because you're effectively blaming the union leaders. You're saying, look, they're not putting it to their members, but you've admitted that you haven't met them since the early part of the year.
But what you're really saying, Sophie, is that in response to that...
You said that you're going to reset the relationship. Well, maybe you should get around the table and try and do that.
But what you're really saying is that because they won't put it to their members, I should get more of the taxpayers' money, because that's who's paying for this, by the way. Since the pandemic, the taxpayer subsidises the railway system.
I'm not talking about the deal.
No.
I'm not asking why you haven't met with them.
Because what you're really saying is the point of all the people that say I should meet with them, it's because they want me to make a more generous offer.
I haven't said anything about the offer.
With more taxpayers' money.
With respect, I haven't said anything about the offer.
But that would be the only purpose of meeting them, is to make a more generous offer. There's a fair and reasonable offer on the table. The revenues going into the railway companies have fallen by 30% since the pandemic. And anyone listening to this knows if you're running a business, 30% of your revenue disappears, you need to make a reasonable pay offer, not a ridiculously generous, a reasonable one, and there needs to be some reform in how the business is run to make it sustainable. Now, that is on the table. I want to drive up the number of people using the rail system, but just throwing taxpayers' money from hard-working taxpayers...
It's free to meet them, though, isn't it? That doesn't cost anything.
If you're just going to meet them and nothing's going to happen, there is no point in doing that. There's a reasonable offer on the table, and I think they should put it to their members.
Gillian Keegan's managed to sort out the teachers' strikes. There's been some progress on the NHS strikes. You start to look like a bit of an outlier here. No,
as I said, we've solved the deal on Network Rail. So all of the Network Rail dispute is now over. The smaller trade unions that work for the train operating companies have accepted the offer that was made to them. So actually quite a lot of progress is made. The outliers are the RMT for the train operating companies, who won't put the deal, and the train drivers union, whose members get paid an average of £60,000 a year for a 4-day week, 35 hours a week. They've got a pay offer on the table that takes that salary to £65,000 a year, and they won't put that to their members either.
Have you met your match with Mick Lynch?
Well, I think you just need to ask who's being reasonable here.
Are they being unreasonable then? Is that what you think?
Well, I think they are being unreasonable. There's a reasonable offer on the table. It's the same value as the one they had on Network Rail. And all I'm saying to them is put it to your members and let your members decide. And that seems to me a very reasonable thing to do.
OK. We talked about growth. And there has been, a bit of a disappointment in growth. Inflation is easing slightly. Do you think that, just from an economic perspective, this might mean that we start to see some of an easing of that pressure when it comes to interest rates, that they might start coming down a bit, helping mortgage owners?
Well, look, I don't want to second-guess what the Bank of England's going to do. It's important they keep the focus on driving down inflation. That's what makes the difference about whether people are better off or not. And we've seen with the latest ONS figures on pay that pay is now rising faster than inflation, so people are getting a real terms pay rise. So we'll have to see how the economic factors... But the Bank of England is having to tread a careful path between putting pressure on reducing inflation, but not so much that it damages the economy. There's a fine path to tread there, and that's a decision for them. The government's trying to support them by making sensible decisions about public spending and pay. And I think we've seen inflation coming down, so we need to see that continue through the year. And then once inflation is under control, then interest rates will be able to fall.
A quick thought on the vote in House of Lords tonight. Now, this is the government wants to sort of scrap some of the laws around water pollution in order to encourage more house building. Are you a bit worried that, you're going to be portrayed as the party of dirty water here? It's something that voters really care about a lot.
Well, it is an important issue, but I'm not interested in what Labour says about it. I'm interested in what we're actually doing, and I've looked at the detail very carefully. There are 100,000 house building opportunities that are going to be unlocked here. We are being very minor changes that we're making, and we're putting mitigations in place to protect the quality of water, because that's very important. Labour say they want to build houses, and then they vote against a measure to do it, as the Prime Minister said today. Keir Starmer goes from being a builder to a blocker. You can't believe a word he says. We want to build houses and protect the environment because we want to enable young people to get on the housing ladder.
But you're prioritising house building?
No, we're prioritising house building and making changes to how we protect the environment, so we continue to protect the environment whilst enabling people to get on the housing ladder, and I think that's a very sensible balance to strike.
Now, I just want to kind of zoom out for a moment, if I may, because Labour still has a pretty hefty lead in the polls, right? Now, the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff reportedly told advisers recently that if they don't believe the Conservatives can win the next election, then they should quit. Do you believe the Conservatives are going to win the next election?
I absolutely do.
Really?
Yes, I do. I've watched the Prime Minister up close. It's why I backed him to be leader of the Conservative Party. I said to you just now, he made the right big calls when he was Chancellor, which is why our country has rebounded fastest economically post-pandemic.
So why don't the public seem to agree with you then?
Well, look, we had a very difficult year last year, which I think everyone understands. The economy, we were having to focus on reducing inflation, so it's been tough for people. So, you know, I would expect people to be somewhat sceptical, but I think we're making the right long-term calls on some of the big challenges facing the country. And look, when we get to the election, as we get towards it, people have to make a choice. They have to make a choice between the Prime Minister who's making the right calls on the long-term issues facing the country, or a Labour leader who backed Jeremy Corbyn to be Prime Minister and who flip-flops around on all the important issues and people can't believe a word he says. And I think with that choice, I know who people will choose, and I think they will therefore give us another term in office. Rishi
Sunak's ratings are now lower than Boris Johnson's. I mean, Guto Harris is sitting over there. He's a big Boris Johnson fan. Was it a mistake to get rid of him?
No, it wasn't. Look, the Parliamentary Party made a decision about Boris Johnson, and I think they were right to do so. But look, I want to focus on the future. The Prime Minister's laying out, I think, the priorities for the country. As we get towards the election, he will set out the priorities for the future and set out our manifesto. And I think when people face the choice at the next election, they'll back the Prime Minister. Okay. I certainly will, and that's what I will continue working towards as we run towards the election.
Ever optimistic. Thank you very much for being on the programme tonight.